Joining us now with more on the late state budget is the Deputy Majority Leader of the State Senate, Mike Gianaris. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
You don't look too worse for wear, considering it's budget season. Are things going well?
Things are moving along. We've seen a significant amount of progress just in the last couple of days. So hopeful this all gets wrapped up this week and the state can go about its business.
What are the issues that are holding up the budget at this point?
Well, there's a handful of things that were the reason we're late in the first place, because there were a series of non-budgetary items that were inserted into the conversation. We had to sift through them one by one, each one very complicated and take a fair amount of time. But it seems like we're finally clearing our way through all that and now getting towards the dollars and cents, which is what the budget is really about, and hopefully wrapping it all up in the next couple of days.
All right, so I think you're referring to bail reform, Kendra's Law, discovery reform, and the Bills Stadium. Is that accurate? Do I have that right?
Well, certainly the issues regarding reforming our criminal laws has been a subject of a lot of conversation. The Bills Stadium is actually a budgetary issue, for better or worse. It involves the allocation of money, but there was efforts to deal with alcohol to go, which is not a budget issue, or 421A, which is the New York City incentives for developers, and a lot of things like that we had to kind of pour over before we finally landed on dealing with the actual dollars in the budget.
All right, let's talk about bail reform. That was sort of the big wrench that was thrown into the budget a couple weeks before it was due by the governor. Has that been resolved?
You've been around long enough, Susan, that until you see print on paper, nothing's actually resolved, but it does seem that we're pretty close to resolution on all those issues, and I think we're going to make some progress in that area.
In terms of, where do you stand on the Bills Stadium deal? I mean, we are hearing from both sides lots of pushback on it, and then, of course, the Assembly heard from their upstate contingent last night, and they were very supposedly eloquent for it. How do you feel?
Well, we also conferenced, and we heard from our members from Western New York, and they are important members of our conference. Senator Kennedy, Senator Ryan spoke passionately about what that means to Buffalo in particular and Western New York in general. Of course, I'm not a big fan of subsidizing wealthy corporations. I've got a long record opposing that. But they did make the point that throughout history, many stadiums in downstate in the New York City area have received these subsidies. And they felt it would be unfair if Buffalo got singled out as the one time that those kinds of projects were stopped. It's still under discussion. There's a lot of concern about it. I don't think it's the best way to do economic development or these stadium deals, but we do have a tremendous amount of deference to our members who represent that part of the state.
Yeah, it's a fascinating issue. I mean, when you think about it, I think Citi Field, Yankee Stadium, they all got public money to be built. Right. This is just sort of an extension of that philosophy undergirding economic development.
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry, it's an interesting point you make, and arguably those were not bright ideas either. But the people in Western New York don't feel like they should be singled out and made an example of because of the bad decisions of the past. We're still working through it. There's a lot of concern because it's not, it's a lot of money we're talking about, and the question of what other things we can do with that money, even though it's not $600 million today because it's capital money, will be bonded out, of course, but it's still money that can be used for other purposes if we had it available. Speaking
of economic development, there are certain reforms that lots of groups are pushing, good government groups in particular. Database of deals, is that in the budget?
We're still working through a lot of those reforms, but they're important to the Senate. I believe we've even passed a number of them as bills over time, as legislation. And so I'm a big advocate of that kind of transparency, and hopefully it does make it in.
How about returning pre-audit power to the controller?
I'll give you the same answer on that. These are all things the Senate believes strongly in. We think that the economic development process in this state has been broken for a while, and the reforms we can make to both make it transparent but also have it function better would be welcome. There's a long history in this state of throwing millions of dollars at these individual projects that don't result in the kind of jobs that were promised, and the money ends up getting wasted. We don't have the luxury of throwing money away in this state, particularly when they're going to specific entities. It's one thing to have an incentive for an industry to succeed, or an industry that would want to do well in New York. But when you're picking winners and losers, which is how the state's economic development has been done over the last decade, it's a problem. And when those winners and when the winners of the funding don't come through and execute on their promises, that becomes an even bigger problem.
Yeah. The other issue is the process by which the Buffalo Bills Stadium was funded. Hochul is getting slammed by the Senecas for freezing their bank accounts and using that money to pay for the stadium. How do you feel about that?
Well, that was a dispute that's been ongoing for a long time, and the governor is taking credit for solving it in the sense that she got the money. The problem is she's trying to tie it to the Buffalo Stadium, which is an unrelated issue. I guess she's suggesting she wouldn't have leaned as heavily to solve the problem if the stadium funding wasn't necessary. I don't really know what that argument's about, but bottom line is, if that was money that was believed to be owed, we should have worked out a resolution. I guess some sort of resolution was worked out, but doesn't mean that money is obligated then to a particular project.
I just want to ask you about a couple other specific issues before we get to redistricting. Discovery reform, any updates on that?
Yeah, that has pretty much been settled, and as I understand it, it's an issue that's been settled to the satisfaction of both the defenders and the reform community, as well as the DAs, and so an item of success so far in the discussion.
Any other successes that you can share with us?
I think on the issue of the criminal laws in general, we're pretty much buttoned up on that. There'll be some changes to the bail laws. There'll be some changes to discovery, as we just mentioned. I think we're going to see some changes to the way we handle gun charges in the state. And so we're trying to be responsive to what the public sees as a need, while not moving us backwards from the reforms we made in 2019 that even opponents think were necessary and successful. So parsing all that out and keeping the state moving forward in a way that protects people's rights and also their safety is what our goal is, and I think you'll see some changes that move us in that direction.
Finally, on redistricting, do you have a backup plan since the lower court struck down the approved maps?
No, we have a plan that we passed. That plan is in effect. The decision last week has been stayed by the appellate division. And so as you and I sit here talking today, the plan that was passed is in effect and is the plan for the elections this year. Petitions are being filed as we speak. They're due up until Thursday. And we'll see how the appeal plays out from there. But we're confident that we've drawn maps that will withstand scrutiny. Even the lower court judge who rejected the maps on a process point pointed out that the Senate maps that we drew in particular withstood the legal scrutiny that was required by the Constitution. And so he rejected the Senate maps in particular on a process point and then said the maps were actually good. So as we wind our way through the appeals process, I'm sure that will all sort itself out, but we feel confident in the work we've done. We have been speaking with the Deputy Majority Leader, State Senator Mike Gianaris. So good to see you. Thank you. Thanks so much, Susan.